He was obsessed with the dead. He was obsessed with dolls, so he turned real deceased girls into his own human dolls. Anatoly Moskvin, he was born in Soviet Russia. As a child, Anatoly had a seemingly normal upbringing. He was an only child to his parents. He was pretty reserved. He kept to himself. He didn't really have that many friends in school, but he kind of liked spending time on his own. He loved to study. He loved reading books. He liked to learn, so he was fine doing that alone. Anatoly was an exceptionally smart kid. How he excelled academically was evident from a very young age. When Anatoly was around 12, he was walking around his neighborhood knocking on different doors to collect recycling for some kind of school project he was working on. While he was doing that, what he saw in a specific house would leave a peculiar and unsettling feeling in him that would leave a lasting impression on him. He walked up to the front door of this house. He noticed that the door was open, and being a curious little boy, he kind of stepped inside to see what was going on. Well, Anatoly had just accidentally wandered into a funeral, but it wasn't any kind of funeral. It was a group of men. They were all dressed in long black robes, chanting what almost sounded like rituals in a different language, and they were all circled around a casket. Inside the casket laid the deceased body of an 11-year-old girl. Her name was Natasha. Natasha's mother was also there, and when she noticed that Anatoly was looking at them, she said, "Come here, come here." And then she tells Anatoly to kiss the dead body of her daughter. Anatoly did not want to, so Natasha's mother, along with some of the men, grabbed his head and forced it down into the casket until he kissed Natasha 3 times. Natasha's mother then looked at Anatoly when she was holding 2 rings. She grabbed his hand and placed one of the rings on his ring finger. She then did the same thing to Natasha with the other ring. The men... It sounds like this is made up, but just stay with me. The men gathered around them and performed some kind of ceremony, and when they were done, they told Anatoly that Natasha was now his wife. That situation would be one that would severely impact the direction that his life would go in. Anatoly left there confused, traumatized, and extremely disturbed, but it was also the start of his obsession with death and communicating with the dead. From that moment on, his favorite thing to do quickly became visiting graveyards. At first, it started because he really thought that he was married to a deceased girl and he wanted to go visit her grave and talk to her. He wanted to build a real connection with her because she was now his wife. Anatoly started seeing Natasha in his dreams. He would hang out with her, they would talk to each other, and it was concerning enough for his parents to notice, and they took him to a doctor. The doctor was informed of what was going on, and the doctor looked at this 12-year-old little boy and told him that the solution to make all this stop was to drink more tea. Yeah, the doctor told him to drink more tea so that he would relax and stop dreaming of this dead girl. That was not helpful at all, but then again, what would be helpful? The vivid dreams started to become too powerful. They got to be overwhelming very quickly. Anatoly couldn't handle it. He didn't want to anymore. So one day in his dreams, he asked Natasha what he would have to do to get her to stop talking to him in his dreams. Natasha explained to him that he could get rid of her, but in order to do so, he would have to hand her off to another little boy. She gave Anatoly instructions on how to do this and how to perform this ceremony that he had to do in order to get rid of her, basically. And somehow, some way, Anatoly did what he had to do. He found a little boy that he thought would be perfect to pass on Natasha to. He performed the creepy ceremony of sorts, and after that, Anatoly would never see Natasha again. However, this encounter with death and what he experienced and what he felt only continued to grow his obsession, not only with death, but also now with the preservation of bodies. He found dead bodies in the afterlife so fascinating, and he wanted to learn more about it. Anatoly went on to go to university, where he would study languages and their history, particularly ancient and obscure languages. He would learn how to speak in 13 different languages. Again, he was a very, very intelligent person. While at university, he would meet a group of people that had a lot of the same interests as him. He would tell them all about his past marriage and his experience in talking to the dead. This group would just bond over the things that they liked, which were death, dark magic, history, casting spells, rituals, communicating with the dead. Anatoly graduated, and he went on to have several academic positions throughout his career. He worked as a historian, showing his expertise in ancient languages. He was a professor at one point and a researcher in different universities, revolving his entire life around learning and teaching because that's what he had always found interesting. However, as far as his hobbies, that was a different story. Anatoly found a passion in writing obituaries, so writing about deceased people. He also became quite the expert in graveyards because he would spend so much time just hanging out there. In the early 2000s, when Anatoly was in his 30s, he was hired by a university to be part part of a research team that was researching information about the dead in over 700 different graveyards. In Anatoly's mind, this was the perfect job for him. It was his dream job. It was what he liked, and he would travel all over Russia to conduct research on every single grave and every single dead person in over 700 different graveyards. And that's what Anatoly would do every single day for the next 2 years. His life was consumed by this project. He was traveling every single day. He didn't really have anywhere to live, really. He was basically living in these graveyards. And I'm not exaggerating. He was living in the graveyards because when he would be done for the day with his research, nighttime rolled around, Anatoly would find coffins that were empty because they were being either prepared for a funeral. I guess I don't really know other reasons why they would be empty, but he would find the empty ones and he would just crawl inside the coffin and go to bed, go to sleep, and do it again the next day. After those 2 years, when he was done with his research project, he moved back home and he met a girl. They got really close and they decided they wanted to start a family together. They wanted to have a daughter. So Anatoly and his girlfriend applied to adopt a daughter, but their application got denied for many reasons. They would not be able to have a daughter together and their relationship would quickly come to an end. However, when Anatoly was told that he could not have a daughter, that just made him want one more. He was set on having a daughter one way or another. In April of 2003, Anatoly's parents left for their annual 6-month vacation. Parents would travel around the country for 6 out of the 12 months of the year, leaving Anatoly alone at the house for him to be able to do anything and everything that he wanted, which quickly became a really scary and disturbing thing. Anatoly had his mind set on getting a daughter, and if he couldn't adopt one, he would just find one for himself. And what better place to find himself a daughter than his favorite place in the world, which were graveyards. One late night in May of 2003, Anatoly made his way to one of his favorite graveyards. He found a grave that had the exact kind of person that he was looking for, a female child, and he began digging up the grave until he got to the coffin, where he cut a hole in the coffin big enough to be able to pull out the dead body from. But Anatoly ran into an issue because the body had a lot of signs of decomposition, which is where we will now introduce his fascination with and different ways to preserve a dead body so that it would not decay. I have a lot of issues with Anatoly himself because not only are his actions repulsive, disturbing, and revolting, but the disrespect of knowing that you are doing this to somebody's child, somebody's friend, someone's loved one that I'm sure has been loved and has been heavily grieved over is beyond me. This person, all of the people that he did this to, were loved by someone somewhere at one point when they were alive on this earth, and still now. Knowing that their families are probably trying to cope and find peace in letting them rest in peace while this sick person is deciding to dig them up and do these horrible things to them, it makes me physically ill. What Anatoly had to do to preserve this body was basically dry it out as much as he could. He had to get rid of all of the internal organs and stuff it with different things to help it be able to keep its shape. He would do this for weeks to this little girl. He would bury the body, leave, come back, dig her back up, do the things that he had to do to preserve the body, bury her again, and do it over and over again until it was done. And then he would leave and come back and dig her back up, hang out with her and spend the night with her, bury her back up, dig her back up again, and repeat and repeat. This was his new routine. He eventually got tired of doing all of that, which is when he decided that he should do it again to a different body, but this body he would take home. He picked the grave of a baby or a little girl that was so young and so small enough to fit in his backpack so that he could take her home. Took her home, started the process of preserving her body until he was done. He now had his very own human doll. And where this whole thing stemmed from was that Anatoly wanted to have a daughter, and he felt like he did because in his head he could communicate with the dead, so that was not a problem. He would talk to her all of the time. But then he started dressing her up. He made a wax face to put on her face to look more lively, I assume. Sometimes he would even use eyeballs from actual dolls, like real dolls, to put on the dead bodies to keep those preserved. I don't know, I'm sick. And Anatoly would do this until he had his very own human doll collection of over 30 dolls. All of the bodies in his collection were from girls aged starting at 3 years old to 12 years old. Basically, any body that was small enough for him to be able to sneak out of the graveyard, he did. Anatoly would dress them up, he would put shoes on them, he would do their makeup, put wigs on them. I think at one point he also started to put It's like making me dizzy actually. At one point he started to put voice boxes inside of them so that if he pressed down on them, they would sing back to him. He of course stuffed them to keep their shape, and if their heads were too decomposed, if the head just didn't stay up by itself, he would cut off the head and replace the real human head with a doll head, but keep the human body. And Anatoly would hang out with them. He would read books to them. He would watch TV with them. He would eat with them. And he would also throw them birthday parties because he knew when their birthdays were because he stole them from their grave. On October of 2003, Anatoly's parents returned from their 6-month-long vacation, and they noticed his collection of dolls, but they didn't think it was weird. They didn't ask any questions. They just kind of let it be. This would go on for years. Every time that his parents left for 6 months on their vacation, Anatoly would do this over and over and over again. By 2009, the police started getting a lot of reports and a lot of concerns because people started to notice that weird stuff were going on at graveyards. It almost looked like grave sites were being disturbed. Throughout the years, Anatoly had continued to research and write papers on grave sites. So when police were getting concerns and reports, they decided to speak to a graveyard expert, Anatoly. Not because they suspected that he had anything to do with it, but they were hoping that with all of his expertise and his knowledge, he would be able to help them find who was really doing this. But of course, when they asked Anatoly, he got really defensive and refused to help the police, so they just kind of dropped it. It wouldn't be until 2011 where this would get too far. It had been going on for over 8 years at this point, and the police had to figure out who was doing this. On November 2nd of 2011, when authorities had been monitoring a graveyard, they saw Anatoly come in the middle of the night, and he was vandalizing a grave. So he was arrested for that. Because Anatoly was now arrested, they wanted to search his house. And they do, and officers of course walk in there and they see this collection of life-size dolls. And the closer that they looked at them, the more they realized there was something off about these dolls, and the faster that they realized that these were not dolls. These were human bodies. Police had the shock of their life. The investigation uncovered 29 bodies inside of Anatoly's home, but they suspected that Anatoly had actually done this to over 150 graves. Anatoly was arrested. He confessed. He told them everything, including what his motive was. He said his motive was, although he knew what he was doing was wrong, he really believed in his own sick mind that he was giving these girls an opportunity to have a better afterlife. And he would refer to his dolls as his girls, like he loved them. All of the parents of the victims were notified, and I cannot even begin to imagine what was going on inside their heads. Everything about this is absolutely horrific. Prior to trial, Anatoly was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, meaning he was not fit to stand trial. Anatoly would be kept in a psychiatric hospital for the indefinite future, and I'm pretty sure that he is still in there, and he hopefully will never get out. Extremely, extremely disturbing, horrific. The disrespect, I just can't. That is the story of Anatoly, and I am at a loss for words. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for listening to this video. I hope you've had the best day ever. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.